Only pity got you invited, Dad said. Then she called me Admiral. The first thing my father said when I stepped out of the taxi wasn't, "I'm glad you came." It wasn't even, "You look good." Standing beneath the white marble entrance of the Harrington Grand Hotel, dressed in his custom tuxedo with a glass of champagne in one hand, he looked me up and down like I was an unwanted stranger. Then he smiled, a cold, practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Only pity got you invited," he said loud enough for my stepmother, my half-brother Ryan, and the line of wealthy guests to hear. A few of them chuckled. Someone whispered, "I thought he wasn't even part of the family anymore." My fingers tightened around the worn leather duffel bag resting against my leg. I'd spent 14 months deployed overseas and another 6 months assigned to classified operations. I had flown across the country without sleep because today was my father's 60th birthday, and despite everything, a part of me still hoped he'd finally look at me the way fathers are supposed to look at their sons. Instead, he took my invitation card, glanced at it for less than a second, and tossed it toward a nearby security guard. "Check it." He probably borrowed someone else's. Ryan laughed while adjusting the gold cufflinks Dad had bought him for his promotion at the family company. "Relax, Dad. Even charity events let people in once a year." My stepmother Linda sighed dramatically. "Let's not make a scene. We already did the decent thing by inviting him." I looked at the 3 people who had spent years reminding me I never truly belonged after my mother died when I was 16. Dad had remarried within 11 months. Ryan had become the golden child. I became the quiet kid who disappeared into military service the week after high school graduation. Nobody asked me to stay. Nobody came to basic training. Nobody wrote letters. Yet here I was, standing outside the most expensive hotel in Boston, wondering why rejection somehow still hurt after all these years. The guard scanned my invitation, nodded respectfully, and stepped aside. Dad leaned closer so only I could hear him. "Stay in the background. Don't embarrass us. Most of these people think I only have one son." His words landed harder than any punch I'd taken in combat. I swallowed the anger because soldiers learn something civilians rarely understand. You don't waste strength on battles that don't matter. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I walked into the ballroom where crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls and every table overflowed with politicians, judges, CEOs, decorated officers, and business leaders whose names regularly appeared on national television. I didn't know why so many high-ranking military guests were attending a private birthday party for a real estate billionaire, but something about the room felt different. Several uniformed officers stood near the stage speaking quietly with men from federal agencies. One woman in a navy dress uniform briefly glanced in my direction before returning to her conversation. Her expression changed for just a heartbeat, almost as if she recognized me, but then she disappeared into the crowd before I could be sure. Dad, meanwhile, had already forgotten I existed, proudly introducing Ryan as the future of the Harrington legacy. I smiled politely, found the table with my name, and discovered it wasn't actually inside the ballroom. It was placed alone in the hallway beside the kitchen doors. I sat there listening to laughter echo from inside while waiters hurried past carrying lobster, filet mignon, and expensive wine. Every few minutes the kitchen doors swung open just enough for me to catch another glimpse of the celebration I apparently wasn't worthy of joining. A young waitress paused beside my table and frowned. "Sir, I think there must be some mistake. This seat isn't even connected to the event. Before I could answer, Ryan appeared carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to a businessman beside him and looked down at me with the grin of someone performing for an audience. No mistake, he said. My brother likes privacy. Several guests laughed awkwardly before following him back inside. The waitress looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. I smiled. It's not your fault. She disappeared, but moments later returned carrying an extra plate of food she admitted wasn't on my ticket. Everyone deserves dinner, she whispered before hurrying away. I hadn't taken more than 2 bites when another figure stopped beside my table. Unlike everyone else, he wore no tuxedo. His dark suit was plain, but the small American flag pin on his lapel caught my attention. Evening, he said quietly. Mind if I sit? Without waiting for permission, he pulled out the chair across from me. His eyes studied every movement I made, not with hostility, but with professional precision. You've kept a low profile, he remarked. That was the assignment. The sentence escaped my mouth before I could stop it. His lips curled into the smallest smile. Old habits. We sat in silence for several seconds until he slid a folded napkin across the table. Written inside were only 4 words. Everything changes tonight. Stand by. I looked up, but the man had already stood. Enjoy your dinner, he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he added, They're almost here. Before I could ask who they were, he walked toward the ballroom and disappeared into the crowd. My pulse quickened. That wasn't coincidence. That was procedure. Military procedure. Someone knew exactly who I was. Across the room, I noticed the same Navy officer from earlier speaking with 2 FBI agents near the entrance. One of the agents subtly scanned the room before nodding toward me. Whatever was happening had absolutely nothing to do with my father's birthday. Suddenly, the ballroom lights dimmed, and everyone turned toward the stage as Dad grabbed the microphone. Tonight, he announced proudly, we celebrate family, legacy, and everything I've built. The irony almost made me laugh. Family? Legacy? He couldn't even acknowledge his own son. Then his voice grew emotional. Before dessert, we have a very special guest arriving to honor our family. Applause filled the room. Ryan winked confidently, clearly expecting another business titan or politician. But outside the hotel's front windows, blue emergency lights flashed, not from police cars responding to trouble, but from a motorcade large enough to stop traffic for blocks. Every conversation inside the ballroom died at once as black government SUVs rolled to the entrance in perfect formation. Secret Service-looking personnel stepped out first, followed by military police in dress uniforms. The hotel manager nearly tripped over himself rushing toward the front doors. Guests abandoned their tables, pressing closer to the windows. Dad frowned. Did someone invite a senator? Ryan shrugged, suddenly less confident. Linda nervously adjusted her diamond necklace. I remained seated in the hallway, watching the reflection of flashing lights dance across the polished marble floor. The strange man who had handed me the note reappeared at the end of the corridor and gave me a single, almost invisible nod. Then the ballroom doors swung open. Silence spread like a wave as an elderly woman entered wearing an immaculate Navy Admiral's dress uniform decorated with rows of ribbons that represented decades of service. Every active duty officer in the room immediately snapped to attention. Even civilians instinctively stepped aside. She wasn't smiling. Her sharp gray eyes scanned the ballroom once, twice, then settled directly on me. Without acknowledging the billionaire host, without greeting the politicians, without looking at the judges or CEOs who had gathered to impress one another, she walked past every VIP in the room. Her polished shoes echoed across the marble until she stopped beside my lonely table in the hallway. Dad forced an awkward laugh into the microphone. "Admiral, welcome. I didn't realize you knew my family." She ignored him completely. The entire ballroom watched as she stood perfectly straight before me. Then, in a voice powerful enough to freeze every heartbeat in the building, she rendered a flawless military salute and said, "Permission to report, Admiral?" The fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. My father's face turned white. Ryan stopped breathing. Every guest stared at me in stunned silence. And before I could answer her salute, the lead FBI agent reached for a sealed envelope marked classified and walked straight toward my father. The sound of the fallen fork echoed through the hallway long after it hit the marble floor. Hundreds of eyes shifted between the woman in the navy uniform and the man everyone believed was the most important person in the room, my father. Moments earlier, he had been standing proudly on stage, soaking in applause as Boston's elite celebrated his success. Now his confident smile had vanished. His fingers tightened around the microphone so hard his knuckles turned white. The elderly Admiral never looked at him. She held her salute with absolute precision, waiting only for me. Around us, every active duty sailor and officer remained frozen at attention. Even the FBI agents stopped moving, allowing the moment to unfold. Slowly, I stood from the small table that had been placed beside the kitchen as though I belonged with the waitstaff instead of the guests. I returned her salute without a word. "Permission granted," I said calmly. The Admiral lowered her hand and offered the faintest smile. "It's good to see you again, sir." A wave of whispers rushed across the ballroom. Ryan stared as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. Linda looked from me to my father with growing panic. Dad forced out an uneasy laugh into the microphone. There must be some misunderstanding. My son was only enlisted." The Admiral finally turned toward him, her expression colder than winter steel. "No, Mr. Harrington. The misunderstanding belongs entirely to you." The lead FBI agent walked to the center of the ballroom carrying the sealed envelope. "Mr. Richard Harrington?" Dad nodded cautiously. "Yes." The agent handed him the envelope. "You've been instructed to read the first page aloud." Dad frowned. "Who instructed this?" The agent answered without emotion. "The Department of Defense." Every camera phone in the room quietly rose into the air. Hands trembled. Conversations disappeared. Dad broke the seal and unfolded the document. His confident posture faded line by line as his eyes moved across the page. I don't understand," he muttered. "Read it," the agent replied. Dad swallowed hard before speaking. "To whom it may concern, due to the classified nature of Commander Daniel Harrington's service, all military records concerning his assignments have remained sealed under federal authority." Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Ryan shook his head violently. "Commander? That's impossible." Dad kept reading, his voice growing weaker. His operational authority required temporary command status over multiple Joint Service Task Forces during overseas contingency operations. Effective under emergency wartime authorization. He stopped reading entirely. His hands began to shake. The Admiral stepped forward. Continue. Dad looked as though he wanted the floor to swallow him. Personnel under his command included officers senior in rank, including flag officers assigned to mission coordination. He couldn't finish. The room had become so quiet that glasses clinking in the kitchen could be heard from 50 feet away. One retired 4-star general slowly removed his glasses. "Good Lord," he whispered. A federal judge sitting near the front stared directly at me with a completely different expression than before. Not pity, but respect. The businessmen who had laughed at me less than 20 minutes earlier suddenly avoided eye contact altogether. Ryan looked toward me and managed only one broken sentence. You never told us." I met his eyes calmly. "You never asked." Before anyone could process the revelation, another black SUV arrived outside the hotel. This time the doors opened, and a group of decorated veterans entered carrying a polished wooden presentation case draped with the American flag. The Admiral accepted it carefully before facing the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "many heroes are known because history remembers them. Others remain unknown because their country asked them to remain silent." She opened the case, revealing medals unlike anything most guests had ever seen. "The man you pushed into the hallway tonight led operations that prevented the loss of hundreds of American lives. He repeatedly declined public recognition because the missions remained classified. The United States owed him silence. Tonight, that silence has ended." Every guest instinctively stood. Some began applauding. Others simply stared in disbelief. My father remained frozen beside the stage, clutching the classified papers with trembling hands. But before the Admiral could present the first medal, the lead FBI agent received a message through his earpiece. His expression changed instantly. He looked directly at my father, then at me. "Admiral," he said gravely, "there's been a development." The ballroom fell silent once again. "We've just confirmed that someone inside this family has been under federal investigation for the past 11 months, and the arrest warrant is now active." The applause died so suddenly it felt as though someone had stolen the air from the ballroom. Every head turned toward the FBI agent. He reached inside his jacket not for a weapon, but for another sealed folder. His voice remained steady, almost emotionless, the kind of voice that delivered facts without apology. "No one is to leave the ballroom." Hotel security immediately locked the exits. Several guests instinctively stepped away from my father, while others looked nervously at Ryan and Linda. Dad tried to regain control, forcing a laugh that sounded painfully fake. "Agent, surely this isn't the time for some bureaucratic misunderstanding." The FBI agent didn't blink. "This isn't a misunderstanding." My father glanced toward the city's police commissioner, who had attended the party as one of his business associates. The commissioner looked away. That single gesture said everything. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Real fear. The kind that couldn't be hidden behind money, influence, or expensive lawyers. Linda grabbed his arm. "Richard, what's happening?" He yanked his arm away. "Nothing." But his voice cracked. Ryan looked between us, completely lost. "Dad, tell me they're not talking about you." No answer came. Across the room, the Admiral quietly closed the metal case and stepped beside me. "Stay where you are, Admiral," she whispered. "This isn't over." Her words confirmed what I had already sensed. Tonight had never been about honoring me. Someone had used this party as the perfect place to expose a much darker truth. The FBI agent opened the folder and began reading. For nearly a year, federal investigators from the FBI, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and the Department of Justice have conducted a joint investigation into an organized fraud and defense contracting conspiracy. The room erupted with shocked whispers. Dad's face drained of color. Defense contracts? Ryan whispered. Dad, our company doesn't. He stopped mid-sentence as realization struck him. My father had recently expanded into government construction projects. Projects Ryan proudly claimed had made the company worth billions. The agent continued. Evidence indicates that multiple shell corporations were used to overcharge the United States government while supplying substandard materials for military infrastructure overseas. Every veteran in the room stiffened. The Admiral's jaw tightened. I felt a slow burn rise inside my chest. During one deployment, we'd lost an operations center after structural failures no one could explain. 3 Marines never came home. At the time, everyone believed it had been enemy action. Now the memories slammed back into me with brutal force. Dad suddenly pointed at me. He's lying. This is revenge. He hates this family. The accusation echoed through the ballroom. I didn't respond. I simply looked at him with the same calm expression I'd learned to wear under enemy fire. The FBI agent interrupted. Mr. Harrington, your son has never participated in this investigation. Dad froze. What? The agent looked directly into his eyes. He wasn't even aware you were a target. That single sentence destroyed the last defense my father had. Guests who had admired him only minutes earlier now stared at him with disgust. The retired judge slowly shook his head. You humiliated your own son, and he wasn't the one hiding secrets. Then the ballroom doors opened one final time. A gray-haired man in a wheelchair rolled inside, escorted by 2 Marines. I recognized him instantly. Colonel James Walker, my former commanding officer. The explosion that ended our mission had left him unable to walk. He caught my eye and smiled proudly. Good to see you standing, son. Then he turned toward my father. Do you remember the Raven base collapse in Syria? Dad's lips parted, but no words came. The colonel's voice grew harder. 3 Marines died because the reinforced steel your company certified was counterfeit. The entire ballroom gasped. Ryan stumbled backward until he hit a table. Linda burst into tears. My father whispered, I didn't know. The colonel leaned forward. That's exactly what every corrupt executive says. The FBI agents moved into position. Richard Harrington, the lead agent, announced, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and offenses resulting in the deaths of U.S. service members. As agents placed handcuffs on my father's wrists, he looked directly at me, not with anger this time, but with desperate regret. Daniel, please, tell them I wasn't a monster. I held his gaze for a long moment before answering quietly. That wasn't my decision to make, Dad. Your choices made it for you. The ballroom stood in stunned silence as the billionaire who had mocked his own son was led away in handcuffs. But just as the elevator doors began to close behind the agents, the lead investigator received another urgent call. His eyes widened. He looked back at me and said words that changed everything once again. Admiral, we've just learned your father's arrest wasn't the end of the case. Someone else in this room has been feeding classified military information to a foreign government, and the evidence points to someone in your own family.